Jacob, how you been, man?
Been good. Been good. It's still, still the way it is, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, just grab my Bible here. Nothing feels different yet.
Yeah.
Stuff is getting announced, but obviously since we're still not here together, it's weird. But don't forget, the elders are going to meet Monday as soon as they kind of get the guidelines from the governor and try to make a decision on what it's going to look like. So make sure that you guys are looking for those, for that information. And I think everything else it still doesn't feel normal, but I guess it's becoming more normal. I don't know. But we're just glad that we still get the opportunity to meet this way. And as long as that's what we have, that's what we'll do. And hopefully you guys have been able to catch up with us and hopefully we'll see the light soon.
Yeah.
Right? Starting to see glimpses of it, but hopefully we'll see it soon. So, how about you, man? How's it been?
It's been good, bro. Just trying not to lose my mind, trying not to, get lonely.
Yeah.
All that stuff, trying to stay in touch with people as best I can through all this. But
yeah, definitely. Once again, just if something happens technologically with us, like you don't see us, you can't hear us, one of those things, text one of us, let us know so we can get it fixed. We're still not experts in the technology department yet, so make sure you let us know those things. Last week we kind of left off, we've been in Romans chapter 12, we started a lot in Matthew, looking at different aspects of relationships and what godly relationships look like. And hopefully you can go back to the beginning. We really started talking about how relationships are embedded in our likeness to God and all those things, and kind of worked our way through to what Jesus called us, specific things He told us to have in relationships if they're going to be godly. And then the last couple of weeks we've kind of looked at Paul's letter in Romans as he's kind of teaching these people, both Jews and Gentiles, who aren't getting along too well, how to have the kind of relationships that God needs them to have as the church. And it goes a lot back to what Jesus said, in John 13 through 15, when He keeps telling them, look, people are going to know you by your love. You've got to love one another. You've got to love the way that I've loved you. And so we've really tried to take a couple of steps back and look at what that actually means and what it looks like in our culture, in our world today. So hopefully that's been beneficial for you. Me and Daniel love talking about it just because we feel like it's really something that's really important, but also something that's probably needed at this time more than any, as we've got this opportunity to kind of look at not just our relationship with God, which is hopefully what we've shown is the most important, because unless you have that right, your other relationships aren't going to be right. But also, as you spend more time with people that you're close to and things, and help you kind of reset and evaluate the relationships that you're in. Hopefully that's been helpful for you. Last week we looked at, or 2 weeks ago we looked at Romans 12:9, talking about let love be genuine. And we really try to focus on if there's a genuine love, that means that there has to be a non-genuine love or a love with hypocrisy. And we kind of looked at that for a little while. And what jumped out, anything that jumps out from you that you could sum that up in just a few phrases?
For me, it just boils down to love. Genuine love is love with no strings attached. Like it's just a constant, kind of like God's love is for us.
Right.
It's no matter what the situation is, no matter what's happening, it's there.
Yeah, and I think that's what we have continued to go back to, is evaluating our relationships with each other with our relationship with God, and how what we're called to do is represent Jesus' love for us through others, and it's just overflowing through us that other people get to see it, and that's how He gets the glory. So the no strings attached is so true, and at the same time, it's so important to understand what love is. We looked a lot at John and 1 John and 1 Corinthians 13, and understanding that it's not, real love can't be fake.
Yeah.
Like if it is, it's going to come out sooner or later that it's not real.
Yeah.
It's not sustainable. Fake hypocrisy, love with hypocrisy is not sustainable. Only genuine love is, and you have to base it on, because genuine love has the aspects that you can't fake, right? Real patience, real kindness, and that's kind of the two we focused on. And the last week we kind of went into this idea of love one another with brotherly affection and outdoing one another with honor, which is kind of, you can see Paul building, how he's wanting this to look, telling you to love genuinely and to reject evil things. And then he says, and the way that you're going to show that to your brother is with affection and with honor. Mm-hmm. And we kind of talked about the two things that jump out with us about that outdo one another with honor is you got to be willing to be vulnerable. Sometimes honorableness is not looked at vulnerableness, but what it does is it gives people the ability to feel safe, the ability to feel needed and wanted and important and valuable and all those things. And, in order for us to do that, in order for someone to really understand what a godly relationship is supposed to feel like, it's got to feel the way that Jesus makes us feel, which Jesus is the most honorable thing and sacrifices himself and makes himself vulnerable so we can see, that it's okay to do that ourselves. And that we only are able to do that because we know that we're protected by God the Father, as Jesus knew the same thing. And then also talked about confidence, and that was kind of what you stemmed from.
Yeah, just the whole idea of, a lot of times we look at confidence as one-upping other people, but it's interesting in this passage because it's saying to outdo one another in showing honor, which kind of goes to that whole idea of, true confidence is being able to take a step back and lift someone else up instead of you, because at that point, you're saying that I guess it's more like I don't really need the attention, more so I'm going to give you the attention, or, I'm confident in who God has said I am, therefore I can, show you who you are because of him. Along those lines, I guess.
Yeah, and I think those two things are so important in relationships, the ability to be vulnerable but also be confident in it at the same time. And those two things seem like they don't work with each other, but actually those are the two things that work together the best. It's easier to be vulnerable when you're confident in where your strength comes from.
And I love the picture of two people trying to outdo each other in honor. That's just such a, it's kind of humorous, but it's...
I always think, I watch The Office a lot, and there's the episode where Andy says if someone does something, a favor for him, he's got to do one right back. Yeah. Like, you give him a gift, right, thank you card, right there, right back at you. And just this idea of like, you're not going to do better than me at being good. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that Paul's necessarily calling it into a competition, but whenever you're able to, because I think some of that fake hypocrisy love can get in whenever it's like that. Yeah. But whenever you're able to not have an agenda with it, like you're just like in this outdoing one another, like, okay, it's not like a competition. It's like, okay, you're showing me how to do more, so I'm just going to keep doing more until we continue to show each other. And that's when real relationships can form that are strong enough to get people through things that we're not meant to go through, right? And that's why those relationships are so important, and they have to be built in that way, because we are going to go through things that are difficult and that people on earth will be able to help us with, but we've got to also be able to have the confidence in God, and we do that through our relationships, I think. Yeah. So as we continue to look at what Paul's trying to tell the church in Rome and with relationships and how Christians act towards each other, we're actually going to look at the next set. We've kind of did one verse last week, and we're going to look at 3 verses in a row here just because we think the ideas with them flow so well together. Starting in verse 11 of Romans chapter 12. Do not be slothful in zeal, be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer, contribute to the needs of the saints, and seek to show hospitality. Just looking at from the beginning, it's such an interesting wording, and I know this is ESV. NASB does a little different. King James does a little different. But I really like the wording that the ESV uses here to describe his idea of what you're supposed to do in zeal, right? Yeah. The idea of do not be slothful, right? We do Enneagram a lot. And if you guys don't know Enneagram, there's a number that the deadly sin for that number is slothfulness. So if you're a 9 out there, you're probably going to get your toes stepped on a little bit maybe in this part. But
6s on Sunday, 9s today.
Yeah, yeah, they got 6s Sunday, 9s today. But this idea is so cool because he says, do not be slothful in zeal. Because if you look at what zeal is, right? Zeal is this energy. Like being very energetic and passionate about something, about a cause. And to say not to be slothful in your energy, right? Do not be slothful in your passion there. In my house, I don't know if there's a much better way to view slothfulness than a movie that is very popular in my house. Some of you guys may have seen Zootopia. And there's this awesome scene that, the sloths are like the funniest ones in the movie, but where they tell a joke, and you get to see kind of this, I think it really introduces this idea of slothfulness and zeal because of the joy. So there's this little clip here if you guys want to. It might be a little small, but you can see. Maybe. It's so slow I could barely tell that he's actually doing it, right? And it just kind of shows, that's how we are sometimes, that we know that something's good, we know that we like it, we know that we need to do it, but that's just not my personality to go quickly. Like, I'm in my ways, I've got to be patient with me. It's kind of the thing. Right? And we talked about patience and love and how it does. And yes, people need to be patient with you, but you can't tell Jesus, okay, Jesus, I'll get there, right, but on my terms. That's where it stops working, right? Like, it can't be done on my terms. And that's what I think slothfulness and zeal is saying, okay, I understand what I need to do, but I'm going to do it in my pace. Because what that is doing is it's saying that your comfortability is more important than the gospel. Because we're talking about, relationships and representing Jesus in relationships, having that zeal. And what it's talking about is the zeal that you're having is this love and affection and outdoing one another in honor. That's what Paul's talking about with not being slothful in zeal. He's saying be zealous about Jesus, about these relationships, about how you show love, genuine love to each other. You need to have zeal in those actions. And I think that, when he goes on to say, be fervent in spirit, what's interesting about zeal and the word zeal and the word fervent is another word for, is the action of being zealous, right? Zeal is a noun, and it's a noun that, shows enthusiasm and energy. But then being fervent is a verb that is, displaying passion or zeal. So he's saying, let your zeal, don't be slow to having your zeal. Don't be slothful. Don't be lazy in getting yourself to have this zeal. And allow the Spirit to drive that zeal. Be fervent in the Spirit. Allow the Spirit to be what drives your energy, your enthusiasm in these relationships. And I think when you look at that, it shows, and he closes the phrase with, serve the Lord. Yeah. Because once again, we're trying to understand how relationships are tied into following Jesus. Well, Jesus tells us that the way that we serve Him is by how we interact with others, right? That's like the number one. Honor God above all. And usually we can understand that pretty well. But then he says the very next biggest thing is, in the new law that he gave them, a new commandment that he gave them, was to love each other the way I love you. And Jesus loved us with passion, and he wasn't slow to do it. He was able to put together everything and put himself in the back seat so that we would know what love is, and so that we could show that love to other people.
Do you think that sometimes our our slothfulness could depend on our setting?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with setting, probably. But what do you?
Or even circumstance. I mean, for me, when we were kind of working through this today, I was thinking, man, this is actually really, really hitting home with me right now, because I feel like this whole situation that we're in right now with this coronavirus and being apart from each other has kind of led me to this place of slothfulness.
Yeah.
More than I should be.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just got me thinking that maybe sometimes it's that we can kind of get lost in this idea of being slothful based on our circumstances or maybe our settings, or, because obviously it's easy to be here at church, to put on the fervent in spirit kind of face, but then what does that look like whenever you're, at your job or at your house, or even, at like a restaurant or coffee shop or something like that?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with we kind of mentioned personality, because I think we all know those people, unfortunately, and hopefully if you don't know these people, you're not that person, but that seems to always bring things down, right? Like if you're excited about something, if you are passionate about something, they're the one to kind of just be like, yeah, but you probably really can't do that. Like, what can you really change? That kind of person that keeps just brings down your passion, because they don't want to exert the energy to have. I mean, have you ever been around someone who's just so passionate about something? It's almost exhausting, right? That they're so passionate about, they're willing to work so hard. That's what zeal is, right? That's what being fervent is. And Paul's saying that's what we're supposed to be with this love from God. That's what we're supposed to want everybody to see it. We're supposed to want to show it. But there's these people, and I think as we're talking right now, we could probably raise our hand saying we've been guilty of it, especially in times like this where it's just kind of, there's not a whole lot of good things to look at, it doesn't seem like. And to say, would you just calm down about that? Like I'll get there, but let's just slow. We can't move that fast. Let's go at this pace. Let's, bring down the excitement level, come down a few notches, get on my level, because I'm not getting up to your level. And I think that's what, with the Romans, the church at Rome, I think that they know, the Jews and the Gentiles know that they're eventually going to have to come together, because they know the teachings of Jesus. That's one of the reasons they follow Jesus, because they know that it's bringing people together. But they're almost saying, yeah, but I'll do that at my pace. Because they've got real conflicts. And they're not willing to put those things that have gotten in between them are important to them. And they don't want to just throw them to the side and say, well, in the name of love for each other, we're just going to move past that and show love, outdo one another with honor, because right now, that's not how I feel about you. And so circumstances and of people, circumstances of times where it's just kind of not easy to find positive things and not easy to see a lot of those things. I think all those things contribute to slothfulness and zeal. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned kind of the bringing down. I was looking at Proverbs earlier, and Proverbs 18 verse 9 says this. It says, whoever is slack in his work, or I guess that could be, the word slack could be replaced with slothful.
Yeah.
Whoever is slothful in his work is a brother to him who destroys. I was reading a book recently, and the author said this phrase that I've been kind of thinking about a little bit They said, if I'm not creating something, normally I'm destroying something. And I was just like, man, how interesting is that? That, if we're not speaking life into people, then we're probably taking it away.
Yeah.
If we're not building people up, we're probably tearing them down. There's not really a lot of middle ground there. And so, for me, thinking about it that way in the context of this verse, it's like, don't be slothful in building people up or outdoing one another in honor, as he just said in that verse.
Yeah, and just kind of sitting here processing through that, the hard thing with that is there's so many things in our world that we would never allow ourselves to get slothful in. Yeah. Right? And we look at work, and obviously there's some people that are slothful in work, but there's a lot of people who, if it comes to their job, or it comes to school, or it comes to sports or athletics or anything like that, the zeal never goes away. Because that's that drive, right? And we The Last Dance, Chicago Bulls documentary is going on, and I'm a huge Michael Jordan fan. And that's one thing that they kept saying about him was the drive he had made his excuses for everything else he did. Like, if he was a jerk to someone, well, he just wanted it that bad, right? And I think sometimes that's what we do with our zeal for love for each other. Is slothfulness is not necessarily lazy, like you're a lazy person. It's that you put other things, you're more zealous about other things than you are about what God has called you to be zealous about. Yeah. And that slows down your ability to be zealous for God and the relationships He's called you to have, because you're so focused on these other things, you can't be fervently, letting the Spirit work, because you're so fervently letting other things work in your life. And I think as you kind of shift that from looking at the slothfulness and zeal and understand that, you've got to be going towards that whenever you start looking at that next phrase, be fervent in the Spirit, that's where I think we usually fall off pretty quick. Yeah. We're allowing, that passion of the Spirit to drive us. We're driven by a lot of things. We're driven by work, success, pride, all those things that we're not supposed to be driven by. And that's whenever you can see your zeal go towards things it's not supposed to be about. Yeah. And if you allow the Spirit to be the thing that's driving your passion and your zeal, then it's a lot easier to see those relationships in the way that you're supposed to. And it's a lot easier to put the work into those relationships because you're not as focused on you and your success and your pride and all those things. But in a culture that's told us that that's what's important, get that right, and think of what you can, if you become successful, think of what you can do with God. And what God says, what Paul says is, once you have God, think about how successful you can be in life, right? But we think, if I can just get to this point in my life, then I can really focus on allowing God to take the number one seat. And what we learn is, and I think all of us have probably been there where we have that thought, there's never an end to it. There never is a good time to say, yes, this is the time, I'm settled. There's always going to be a next step that's going to take your time. And I think Paul's saying, allowing the Spirit to be the thing driving your passion instead of the things of this world driving your passion, that's how you're going to serve the Lord. That's how you're going to see the love that you're supposed to have. This is never a fun thing to talk about because it steps on a lot of people's toes, but and in mine included, that we are not good at letting the Spirit drive us in our passion. We find passions and then try to incorporate the Spirit into them, instead of having the Spirit and incorporating things into our lives with the Spirit. And that just is not a recipe for what Jesus says a godly relationship with God is, but it's also going to affect your godly relationship with other people. Mm-hmm. Because if that relationship isn't right with the Spirit, then your relationship with people isn't going to be right either.
Yeah. And I don't think we need to misunderstand, that our work and all these things, they aren't bad things.
Right.
And actually they can be very good things. But it's all about, are we letting that get in the way of relationships? Because, the whole point of this is we're talking about we were made for relationships. You know, we weren't made to be, per se successful in things. We were more so made to be together. Yeah. And, I think that's what we're talking about is just we need to be the best that we can be at our work, in our families, in all these different things, but not just because of ourselves, but because of the people around us. Because we're trying to draw close to the people around us, and we're trying to be one as God has called us to be.
Yeah, definitely. The next verse is, kind of continues to speak to this idea, because he starts off after he says, serve the Lord, he says, rejoicing in hope, and be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. But this idea of rejoicing in hope, and that when we first looked at this, the question that Daniel asked, I think is so important, because I think it's one of the most misrepresented words that we have, is you ask me, what does hope mean to you? And, we use phrases like, I really hope that this happens, right? I hope that I win this. I hope that I made a good grade. I hope that I did this. And what's funny about using the word hope that way is it's almost like a wish. Like, it can be interchanged with, we in our culture, in the way that we use the word hope, it can be interchangeable with the word wish. And it's just this, whenever you put it in that perspective, to think that the way you speak of Jesus, because Jesus is our hope, is that it's just a wish like a genie, is got to be so insulting to him, right? Because we know that our hope, we're told that our hope comes from the empty tomb, right? And the empty tomb is not giving us something to wish for. It gives us the confidence that that Jesus is who he said he was, that he defeated death, and that if we follow him, we're going to be risen up when he comes back. So what we call hope is actually wish, because hope is not wishing. Hoping is confidence. It's, I have hope in this. I know that this is going to happen, because even though it's not happening right now, I can't physically see it happening right now, I know that it's going to happen because Jesus told me this was what was going to happen. And I believe and I can trust in the words of Jesus. I have hope in the words of Jesus because he already fulfilled what he said he was going to do. So it's not a wish, it's a promise, and it's a confidence in a promise. Yeah. But I think that holds us back so much to where, and I think that going back to the slothfulness and zeal and what we're talking about with work, the reason that we're so passionate about work and about, maybe even athletics or, our hobbies or anything like that, the reason we get so passionate about that, but it's really hard to have passion in spiritual things, is because in our minds we can see and feel this, and we can see it's there, right? And we know it's there. And we feel like we have control. And the sad part is that we don't feel the same way about our salvation in Jesus. And I think that's the number one thing that hurts relationships. It hurts relationship with God. It hurts our relationship with other people. It keeps us from being able to be the people that Jesus called us to be, because we don't have the same confidence in Jesus as we do in ourselves and what we're doing here. And if that's the way we are, and I understand it, because it's not like I'm just saying it's an easy thing to do to get to that point. But if that's the way we look at things, if we look at hoping in Jesus as a wish that we don't have confidence in, then how could we be passionate about it? Yeah. Passion comes from knowledge and knowing and having certainty. And if that's how we view the Spirit, then a lot of these things are going to come with it. But if we don't view Jesus and the Spirit with that confidence, then there's no way to get to who we're supposed to be.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I mean, I feel like it really makes a lot of sense why we use that word wish so much in our culture, just because everything is always changing.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you even look at just the stuff in, the 22 years that I've lived, like where it started. We had dial-up when I was born.
Right.
And now we can access things super quick. But it's just always changing, and so a lot of times we end up wishing for things here on earth because it's like, well, something could change, something, out of my control could happen, something like that. But I think it's great, and it's a real comfort And even something that Paul here is saying, you can rejoice in the fact that God's word always holds true. Like if God makes a promise, it's yes and amen. Like it is done. And we look through the Bible, he has a perfect track record. Like God has never lost. And that's where that confidence comes from, is we can just say, God's word is true. And once I feel like once we really begin trusting that, that changes a lot of things, and it gives us a place to rejoice,
Yeah, I'm going to reiterate something you said, because I think that people may have been laughing that you dated yourself by saying dial-up internet was when you were a kid.
Oh, man.
Yeah, most of us didn't have internet or any of those things, but when we were kids. But what you said is so true. Everything's so changed. The world's changing so much. A lot of things we have confidence in is done away with, a lot of times. And looking back at this, here's one of my favorite things that people say to me. Whenever they are being pessimistic and things like that, I say pessimistic, because what they're going to say is, no, I'm just a realist.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just a realist. I'm not trying to bring things down. I'm just trying to be real with you. And I think a lot of times, that slothfulness is not necessarily, being slow. It's almost that pessimism, that saying, oh, I'm just being real. Your zeal, your passion, that can't be real. Like, how can you have confidence in that? The confidence to be that certain of something. And the reason is because we rejoice in the hope, right? We are passionate in the Spirit, and we are, not slow in zeal, because we rejoice in the promise and the certainty of who Jesus is. And we can be all these things to people and be vulnerable and put ourselves out there because we understand that God is the person taking care of me, not the person that, even if they reject me, even if that person slanders me, even if they do all these terrible things against me, we rejoice because the ones who came before us, right? That's what Jesus says in the Beatitudes. If someone says something bad about you, if someone does you wrong, rejoice, knowing that your fathers before you dealt with the same things, and yet God was firm for them, and He'll be firm for you. And it's that idea that allows us to say, and I'm not saying it's smart to go out there and just be like, well, I'm going to let people take advantage of me, right? Nobody's saying that. But some people are so scared of being taken advantage of that they won't allow themselves to view people in the view of God's mercy. They won't allow themselves to be confident in Jesus coming back because they've seen so many bad things happen in the world that it makes them say, well, I'm a realist. I've seen these bad things happen. But at the same time, if you believe that the tomb is empty and Jesus is coming back, these things on earth are only going to happen for a little while, and you have to start thinking about, eternity. And that's what Paul's telling me. He's like, you guys have to stop thinking so much about what's right in front of you and start looking at eternity. Yeah. And that's where your joy is going to come from. That's where your passion is going to come from. Not looking at things right here, but looking at what's coming and what's been promised to you in the hope that has come.
But do you think it could be a both and, though? Not only in the things coming, but where you are now. Because I find a lot of comfort, in the fact that the place that I am now is the place that I'm supposed to be. I find a lot of comfort in, like you said before, the tomb is empty. We know Jesus is who He said He is, which also in turns mean that we are who He says we are.
Yeah.
That's something that gives a lot of motivation in itself. So could it be, something, hope being something that we rejoice about, not only in the sense of the far off, but also right where we are?
Yeah, I think that's part of the hope, right? Mm-hmm. Is that Jesus has already conquered. Like, we don't have to wait for Him to do it. He's already done it. Like, we're living in the midst of it. And that's one of the hard things for us to understand too, is understanding that even though we have things coming, that we live the representation of those things right now. Yeah. That's what hope is living the things that are coming right now. That's what bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth is, right? That's what the kingdom is right now. We know that heaven is the goal, but Jesus established the kingdom here. And that's what we're supposed to be living within. Not within the world, but we're supposed to be citizens of the kingdom, not of the earth. And I think sometimes it's really hard for us to view that, because we still view it as something coming, and there is something coming, but it's been established already. And we start living that way now because we know what's coming. And I think that kind of goes back to some of us. The slothfulness is not just wanting to be slow, but it's within our personality. That's what people will say. I'm a realist. I'm skeptical. That's another big word, right? Skepticism. I'm skeptical of that. And I think what he's saying is, if you're skeptical of zeal, of being zealous, if you're skeptical of having passion in the Spirit, right, then allow the hope that you have to carry you. Mm-hmm. Now, me and Daniel, and maybe you've already seen this video that's coming up, but me and Daniel are about to show you a video, and I'm going to switch it so you guys can see it well, of our idea of what it means for the Spirit to, through the hope of Jesus, to carry our slothfulness, to take care of that slothfulness inside of us. Let's see if I can get it here.
You're going to pick it up?
So obviously we got a sloth going right here. So sometimes it's just we're so skeptical, right? We're so skeptical to allow this to happen in our lives and allow the people to trust.
Oh.
And sometimes we just got to allow the Spirit to carry us through. And it's kind of a silly, funny thing, right? Spread my wings and fly away. Watch with the cars. I mean, that's good stuff, right? But at the same time, we have to be able to allow to trust that God is in control. That when things aren't easy for us, like it feels out of our control, because I think a lot of us are naturally skeptical. And if you look at the Enneagram, it explains it a lot. Like Steve talks sixes. Hey, we're going to kind of bash on sixes tonight, I guess, too. But sixes especially, there's kind of like, hey, fives, we're realists. We got to have the evidence right in front of us. And in order for us to put ourselves out there, to make ourselves vulnerable, we've got to know that it's okay. And what Paul says here and what Jesus told us is the hope of the Spirit, the promise of the Spirit that's with you today, and the hope of eternity that's given through Jesus conquering the grave and conquering sin and conquering death. That is what can allow the skepticism to be put to the side, and for you to be able to treat relationships and have the passion and zeal for God, the relationship with God and the relationship with people through God. That hope is what's going to allow you to do that. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think it's so hard for us to let ourselves do that. But if we would just step back and understand what Paul is saying, what Jesus is saying, and the fact that all of this has already happened. Like Jesus has already conquered this. That's what you can be confident. If there's anything you can be confident in, it's that. The tomb is still empty to this day. Like there's nobody in there because Jesus is sitting at the right hand of God, And He gave us His Spirit to help us along this way. So let your passion dwell in those things and let that drive the rest of your life instead of trying to build your life in things and bring the Spirit into that. He says it's not going to work that way. In the same way, in our relationships sometimes, we try to build relationships on worldly things and then bring the Spirit into it. Yeah. Right? And if God is not, if those things that we mentioned, respect, value, if those things aren't at the core of the relationship, then God's not at the core of that relationship. And it's hard to add that to the bottom whenever you've already built it on stuff it's not supposed to be standing on. Yeah. But I think that, that idea of confidence and hope tells us that very thing.
So what I'm hearing is the opposite of rejoicing in hope is living in fear.
Yeah, I would say, yeah. As he goes on to say, pray through tribulation, and or persevering in tribulation and being devoted to prayer, and those things that are just things that continue to accompany that rejoicing in hope. You can endure the hard times because you already know the confidence of where you're going. You can be devoted to prayer because you realize that God is the thing sustaining you. So that's where you go to for comfort, is God, not worldly things. And I think it's really interesting, and we'll focus a lot more on these last two verses next week as we start to kind of close up. But after he says all of that, he says, contributing to the needs of the saints and practicing hospitality. But how the ESV puts that is, says seek, right? Seek to show hospitality. And I think one of the biggest things that tells us whether we are not slothful in zeal and fervent in the Spirit is how hospitable we are. I think hospitality has been a thing that's kind of morphed through the years. In the Old Testament, like you were saying earlier, a lot of the setup of houses and stuff was built for hospitality in the time. And we've kind of it's almost shifting back to that now, I think. But for a long time, like, hospitality was not the focus of building homes. We had like all these walls, and rooms were very separated, and it wasn't open to where you get a lot of people in there. And I think it was really representative of the culture of that time, where people were more about themselves than the mass. And as we were starting to come out of that, I think the idea of being hospitable has fallen to, well, whenever someone needs hospitality, we give it to them. Instead of saying, we're going to go out there and give hospitality to people. Yeah. And I think that that's part of the big change, and part of showing our passion and our hope is if we're willing to put ourselves out there to show hospitality, instead of it just relying on people to seek it from us, but instead we're seeking people to give it to. Yeah. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I actually have a very personal experience with this. There was a family when I was in college who they did the Adopt a Student, and they started with just, I think, 2 of us college students, did like the whole Adopt a Student thing, kind of like we do here, and they adopted me and another one of my friends, and I mean, it was crazy the hospitality they showed us, first off. They gave us their garage code. It was like they put snacks in the cabinet for us. They did all these things, right? But then it was like whenever we wanted to bring a friend over or anything, the same applied to them. Like, they were literally in every single sense of this, seeking to show hospitality to anybody they could. And I just found that amazing and inspiring, and it's something that, I kind of want to give back eventually myself. But that is the first thing I think of when I think of this verse. It's just, not the way that they kind of exemplified this to me was like it wasn't a closed door invitation. It was, in every sense of the word, an open invitation. It was like, we don't even have to be home, just come. It's just mind blowing to me, because it was a very eye opening thing for me, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And that's part of it, is we're almost uncomfortable to receive hospitality, right? So in a culture where we're so resistant to receiving hospitality, I think that's one of the reasons we've got to say, we can't view the world's idea of this. We've got to take Jesus' view of this. Mm-hmm. And people aren't going to be seeking hospitality because they're scared of hospitality. Yeah. So we've got to take it to them so they'll fully understand who Jesus is. Yeah. And we do that because of how hospitable Jesus was for us, how He was willing for us to come no matter what and open to us. Yeah. And if we're going to represent that, Jesus didn't stay in heaven waiting for us to come to Him, right? There came a time where He says, okay, they aren't getting it. I'm going to take it to them. I'm going to make sure they know that this is not something that is unreachable.
Yeah.
I'm going to go down there so they can see and feel and touch and realize just how open I am to you if you'll just come to me. But the problem with that is a lot of times we're so slothful in getting there that we miss out on that opportunity. And I think that that just kind of goes back to the, seeking hospitality. You can't do that while you're being slothful in zeal.
Yeah.
It puts pressure on you to go and do. And which is interesting, because isn't that what Jesus called us to do? Go and do. And so as we kind of bring it down to a close, we're going to focus a little more next week on why it's so difficult for us and kind of the obstacles. One of the big ones being social media, right? Like, I don't know if anything has hurt relationships more, and it can be a very good tool, and it's really necessary, I think, even in our culture today. But giving people the ability to hide behind computer screens and act a certain way on the computer and then expect people to view you differently whenever you're in person. Like, I saw how you talked about that person online. Why would I think that you're going to be loving towards me right now in person? And so that's what we're going to focus on a little bit next week. Some of those obstacles.
Yeah. Literally, this is summed up in a verse just 3 chapters over in Romans. And this just it goes back to the idea that we talked about at the very beginning, giving what you receive first. But Romans chapter 15, verse 7 says, "Therefore welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you for the glory of God." And I think that sums that up.
It does. Just a couple of announcements for you guys. Don't forget, Sunday morning, 10 o'clock, we'll be back online worship, streaming only. We should have an announcement on something Monday night, hopefully, so be looking for that. We'll be back here Sunday night at 4:30 for Kids Connection, and Jake will be on the live stream and Zoom meetings for growth groups at 5.
Y'all should feel lucky. The Kids Connection is not the only one that gets videos.
Yeah, that's true. Now, people have been talking about the Kids Connection videos. Look, we set you guys up this week. Some of you guys have been asking about ways to give online. We have set up a PayPal account, and there's some instructions on that in the Midweek Minute that Steve sent out today. So you should have gotten an email, the Midweek Minute, that Steve does every week that has our announcements of the sick and all of those. So be checking that. Tells you all of our prayer needs that are going on and all those things. But also, Jack Martin just sent me something. I'm sorry. That was really funny. Also, if you're looking to give online electronically, there has been some ways to set that up. You guys have been wonderful in still giving and being a giving church, as you always have been through this time. But we want to know if we need to be, giving back to you. So if you have a need, if there's something going on that you need help with, whether it be spiritually, personally, financially, whatever the need is, please let us or the elders know so we can help take care of each other. And strengthen these relationships that we're talking about, because that's part of what we're saying. Being hospitable is not just waiting for you to come, but we want you to know we're coming to you. If you have something, please allow us to be there for you and show the love of Christ in the way that He's called us to, because that's what He does for us. Anything else we're supposed to?
Not that I can think of.
All right, you want to close this out in prayer?
Sure, let's pray. Dear God, thank you so much for another chance to just be on the live stream tonight and for us to listen to your word. And God, we're just so thankful for the love that you show us. And God, the life that it just gives, not only to us, but Father, I just pray that we give life to other people by loving them the way that you love us. God, I just pray that through this time that we're not slothful in zeal, that we are just passionate, and that we fan into flame our gifts and the abilities that you've given us to bring glory and honor to you. Father, I just pray that we burn with passion to share with people God, I just thank you for Jesus, and thank you for the cross and the empty tomb, and that we can rejoice in hope because of those things. And God, just thank you for loving us the way you do, and that we are able to be called your children. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Love you guys.
Love you all.